there's one or two channels, more than likely at the start, that work and provide results better than any other channel out there, right? I haven't started YouTube ads yet, but I know that doing networking, or we talked, the other week about strategic partnerships, I know that those two are working. Well, instead of allocating my resources to something that I am not managing well because I've never done it, I don't know the numbers, I haven't managed it, I can't scale that, even though inherently paid ads has a greater scalability than, say, networking does, because networking is a very time heavy, time intensive thing. But I know in the beginning what those measurements are, right? I know what the numbers are. I know how to manage and move them in the right direction. So now I can do more of it in, say, networking or strategic partners. I can do it better, continue to improve, and I do that over and over and over again, right?
Ooh, today we are covering a great topic, one that many of us face as we grow in our businesses. And this is the topic of scaling and talking about how to scale, when to scale, should we scale, and is my business scalable? So these are the few things that we're going to uncover, along with some other things that Tanner has to say on the matter. So, hi, Tanner, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing this afternoon?
Doing well, doing well. Excited to learn about scaling and kind of some best practices around that topic.
Yes, scaling is a fun topic to get into, fun terminology to kind of peel back the layers on, and what does that actually look like in business? So yeah, I'm excited to get into this one.
Well, yes, let's start off with like giving people kind of an idea what is scaling. We maybe have an idea of what it is to scale in business, but don't know how. But what's kind of a general overview of scaling in business?
Well, maybe let's take a step back and if I can ask you some questions. So you're in business for yourself as well, and you're part of kind of different businesses, things like that. So why would a business want to scale? What does that mean in kind of your context, or why should scale even be kind of part of our terminology at this point?
Oh, definitely. This is a great question. I mean, there's a variety of different reasons to scale. One of them is, if you have a great product or service to expand it to other areas, other demographics, other parts of the world, even. Also to just increase the bottom line, increase your profit margins, and be able to create more jobs for other people. And so there's so many different reasons to scale. I think those are a few that are important for me is just to continue to grow forward and then also provide jobs and then also work on my bottom line.
Very cool. And I absolutely love it. And I think, the reason I wanted to kind of pose it back as a question first is to kind of set some frames or some context around kind of the rest of the conversation. Because there's going to be a portion of you that are either listening or watching this later on that are absolutely in a position where we need to talk about what does scale actually look like. I've got a business, it's sustainable, we're ready to kind of take that next step and scale. That being said, there's also going to be the other end of the spectrum of people that are early in their business journey, their entrepreneurship journey, and scale is just a word you don't need yet because you haven't mastered the fundamentals. And there's a ton of different ways to look at the particular topic, but if I'm going to say this as plainly as I can, if you have not mastered the unscalable, there is no need to focus on scale. If you are not
Mm.
measuring and managing the things in your current business to provide a single result to a single avatar or person, there is absolutely no need to think about what is the scalable version of this business model. Focus on actually gaining profitability first. Actually get into that market that you're currently in. Once you have that nailed, have that mastered, then we can start talking about what does scalability actually look like.
That makes total sense because if the topic of scaling is brought in too early, it can be, of course, like could possibly cause your business to fail faster or go in a direction you don't want it to go, or maybe just like create a lot of overwhelm and headache. So I think that's really important to establish that, like build the foundation of your business first, get the nuts and bolts working, create that blueprint of what it is, and then see what it looks like to scale. So what are some of the first, steps of scaling? Is maybe some small steps or and then maybe going into something larger?
Yeah, so when I think about the concept of growing a business, we'll just call it growing because there's going to be the what I would consider like non-scalable growth or just kind of that first iteration of growth within a business, and then hitting the kind of that tipping point we can start to layer in a lot more leverage and complexity, and that allows us to kind of really scale a business. So I kind of do two different phases here, but at its core, there's something that needs to be taken care of first, and that is the fundamentals of business, or what we call within the action coach world mastery. And mastery is all about, in my opinion, two things. It's really your investment thesis and it's your allocation of resources. So we break mastery down into four basic categories. And I promise I'll bring this into the growth here in a second. But the four basic categories are going to be destination, like where's the business going? Um, Delivery, which is the actual service that you provide or the product that you provide, the value that you provide to the marketplace, and then time and money are kind of the two other pieces. So when you kind of break those down, that first one, destination, is really about your investment thesis and your plan to be able to achieve a return on investment, right? That's why we got into business in the first place. Is we're creating an entity, an asset that can extend beyond us, should have profitability, yada yada. So the investment kind of thesis there, the actual value that you provide to the marketplace for your product or service, that is kind of that point number two, or the delivery piece. And then the last two, so 50% of this fundamental foundational piece of the business then is the allocation of resources. So your time resources and your money resources. And more often than not, especially early on in the journey, you have more time than you do money. And so it becomes really important to understand how do we allocate the resource of time, which means we might be starting with activities that aren't totally scalable at the very beginning. And that's okay because you need to be able to have a high level of service and get customer feedback and be able to overperform to get the testimonials and the reviews and everything else that's going to allow you to penetrate the market even deeper as you continue to grow. So, like, being able to master that piece first requires us to do one major thing, that's measure. We have to be able to measure what's happening in the business. Where's our time going? How is our time or our money being invested? What does that look like from a product building standpoint? What does that look like from a marketing and sales standpoint? Like, where are those resources going? Not necessarily changing it yet, but just understanding where is it going. So bringing this all the way to growth or scale of a business, this is kind of how I conceptually think of it. Once we have that mastery kind of figured out first, the fundamentals figured out first, and we can start to think of I think it's Peter Drucker that taught the measure, manage, move. We can only move what we manage and we can only manage what we measure. So we have to start with the measurement first, and then we can actually manage those things and then make some improvements and move the numbers and all of that kind of stuff. But where this like fully brings through is when we have that in place, when we have that foundation in place, we understand what we're measuring, how we can manage those numbers, and then ultimately move the needle in the right direction. Then we focus on more, better, new. And Alex Ramosi said this at one point. I absolutely loved it, kind of stealing it from him because it made so much sense in the context he was sharing it, but then in this context as well. So uh, let's take marketing and sales as kind of the example. When we're measuring and managing the numbers, one thing's going to become very clear. There's one or two channels, more than likely, at the start that work and provide results better than any other channel out there, right? I haven't started YouTube ads yet, but I know that doing networking, or we talked, the other week about strategic partnerships, I know that those two are working. Well, instead of allocating my resources to something that I am not managing well because I've never done it, I don't know the numbers, I haven't managed it, I can't scale that, even though inherently paid ads has a greater scalability than, say, networking does, because networking is a very time heavy, time intensive thing. But I know in the beginning what those measurements are, right? I know what the numbers are. I know how to manage and move them in the right direction. So now I can do more of it in, say, networking or strategic partners. I can do it better, continue to improve. And I do that over and over and over again, right? More, better, continue to do that until the results no longer hold. In other words, you kind of hit the plateau and you're not like, you don't get more out for the amount that you put in, but that
Mm-hmm.
channel, that strategy starts to have massive profitability off that one singular channel. Now you can use that to do something new. i.e., moving into a new channel, new, YouTube ads, Facebook ads, paid ads, whatever it is, whatever that next thing is, and then you do the same thing and you build up that mastery within that channel. Now we're starting to talk about this is where scalability starts to take place from a marketing and sales standpoint within a business. This is where we start to get into true scale, and what that can look like. But if we don't have that mastery piece figured out, if we don't know what we're measuring and managing, we can't do more of it. We can't do it better because we don't know what to improve and where to improve it.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. It's again, building that foundation first is always important. And if it's like me, I get caught in that like shiny object syndrome as an entrepreneur where I'm like, oh, look at this brand has scaled. Why don't we just jump right into that? You probably see that. And then you see people get overwhelmed or not sure, or things don't align. What are some ways we can really clue into those moments of, okay, we want this. How do we create a plan to get there rather than just jumping into that?
Mm. This goes back to part of what I said, and is if you look at kind of those brands, you're like, holy crap, they have scaled like crazy. They're moving at the speed of light. I almost guarantee you, every single one of those large brands that you see scaling in the market today know more numbers than you know what to do with. They have so much data, so much that they can make decisions off them that has allowed them to continue making the right decisions to allow them to grow.
Mm,
So it comes back to we have to start with the measurement first. That, like, if there's a tip to take away from it, we start with that piece, and then we can kind of start to work on the other pieces from there. Um, I think understanding the business that you're in is another big piece of it. You don't traditionally see, let's say, service-based businesses or things with longer sales cycles is probably a good example here. You don't tend to, not always, but you don't tend to see those kind of scale or explode into the market as much as maybe a CPG brand or some other retail e-commerce type of a business. And a big reason for that is the information data chain that we have. If everything happens online all the way through to clicking through and getting the sale, and you can track every single thing digitally, it's easy to get the feedback from sales and sales meetings or add to cart or whatever that just previous step is, and be able to
mhm,
feed that back to your Google ads or your Facebook ads or whatever else it is, so it can optimize for the appropriate result, and then you can scale that like crazy. When you start looking at longer sales cycles, you look at things that have primarily offline sales conversions. So I think of, let's take a CPA firm as an example, right? That's a very um, relationship based business in many cases, right? You get maybe a lead comes through digitally, but after it becomes a lead, now it's conversations offline, it's face to face meetings. Being able to feed that information back to be able to optimize and improve the marketing process, it's a little bit harder. It still can be done, but it's harder. So that's where you kind of see that disconnect of, you don't traditionally see a CPA firm that's all of a sudden just scaling at crazy levels unless they're doing it through acquisition.
mhm,
Rolling up a whole bunch of different firms that already have a little bit of established numbers and things like that, but being able to bring it all into a centralized place where, again, you're managing the numbers within the business to be able to optimize and increase the areas that will have the highest return on investment.
mm. That also makes a lot of sense too, especially looking at what is your brand, kind of brings it back. Like, what is your brand? What do you see your brand growing to? Who are your clients? And are you a product or are you a service? And so those are some things to consider as well. So any like final thoughts on like scaling in general? If someone is, how do we really know when we're ready to scale and what can we do to get help with that?
I think the if I had a final parting thought when it comes to how do you know when you're ready to start that conversation of scale? Um, I think one of the early indicators is that you, as the business owner, as the business provider, maybe it's a service where you're doing a lot of the service as well. Um, when you're truly out of time and you're actually profitable and you've got some consistency in your business, but now you're out of time, Now we need to start looking at what can we amplify in what areas that's going to allow me to buy back my time. Because only when you buy back your time do you then get to continue to compound that ability to really grow, which then leads you into a more scalable conversation. So that could be one indicator. Now, I say that cautiously because there may be some here that are like, Tanner, I'm already out of time. It's like, great. Let's actually dive in and see if you're actually out of time, or if we're, maybe investing our time resource into some of the wrong areas. In other words, it's just not helping us get to the point where we've got additional profitability and things like that. But once you've kind of hit that point of I'm out of time, business is running in the right direction, it's making money, but now I need to look at, can I scale this? That's where we can then dive into some of the data. So that would be number one. If you're like looking at where and when do I have that conversation around scale, it's uh, master the unscalable first. What's everything that you can do to provide the absolute best product and service that you can, to a level that you just run out of time. And then we can start to work on that next phase of, what does this business look like with leverage? What does it look like to be able to take that next step? Is that feasible? Or is the cost just not worth it at that point? And then you can have some different conversations. There's a lot of different
Mhm.
ways to scale, right? You may hit that threshold and find out the business itself may not scale at that level. Like that is kind of the pivotal point of what's possible, or what's what will return the investment well enough, right? Maybe you can scale, but then all of a sudden it just takes up more time and it's more hassle than it's worth. A different way to scale at that point might be, maybe that's where we franchise it or license it or do something else where you have a whole bunch of little things going only up to that level. So a couple different ways to look at it at that point. That kind of tends to be the inflection point that starts that conversation of what can it look like, what does it look like, and then we can look at what's the structure for scaling and building a full big on business. For most of you that are listening or watching this, my guess is the vast majority of the audience is before that threshold, in which case really focusing on what can I track and measure in the business. How do I know what's working so that I can do more of what's working and less of what's not? That's probably step number one to start seeing that traction move in the right direction.
Wow. Well, this was so insightful. Thank you so much to just like help uncover what it is to scale, what it looks like, and then also where we need to be when we're looking to scale. So I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Tanner.
You're welcome.